The field hospital existed on borrowed time. It sat on the edge of hostile territory, stitched together from canvas, steel poles, and stubborn human will. Dust coated everything: boots, stretchers, IV lines, even the air itself. Helicopters came and went at all hours, dumping wounded men into the hands of exhausted medics before lifting off again toward the sound of distant gunfire. This place was where missions ended, or lives did. Operators from the Navy SEALs passed through almost daily. They arrived silent, bloodied, sometimes unconscious, sometimes gripping weapons they refused to let go of. These were men trained to endure pain, fear, and loss without breaking. Yet here, stripped of armor and adrenaline, they were human again, fragile, bleeding, and dependent on strangers. Among those strangers was Lieutenant Rachel Hale. She didn't look remarkable, average height, hair pulled tight beneath her cover, sleeves rolled down even in the suffocating heat. Her voice was calm, almost gentle as she moved between beds and trauma tables. She never rushed, yet she was always the fastest one in the room. Her hands moved with precision, never shaking, even when incoming rounds cracked somewhere beyond the perimeter. The SEALs noticed things like that. They noticed how explosions didn't make her flinch, how she always positioned herself with a clear line of sight to exits, how she instinctively turned toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it. Most medics froze for a split second when the alarm sounded. Rachel never did. She simply adjusted. "Pressure here," she said softly to a wounded operator as mortar fire thumped in the distance. "Breathe with me. Don't close your eyes yet." Her eyes never left his face, or the doorway behind him. That night, a 4-man SEAL team arrived after an operation gone sideways. One had a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Another was bleeding heavily from the leg. The third was unconscious, chest rising unevenly. The fourth refused treatment until his teammates were stable. Rachel took control without raising her voice. She assigned tasks, triaged wounds, and made decisions in seconds that would take others minutes. When the generator flickered, she calmly switched to backup power as if she'd done it 100 times before. When a young corpsman hesitated over a clamp, she guided his hands, not gently but decisively. "Now," she said, not asking, commanding. The wounded operator survived. Later, outside the tent, one of the SEALs leaned against a crate, watching her clean blood from her gloves. "She doesn't panic," he muttered. "No," another replied. "She doesn't even hesitate." They didn't say it out loud, but the thought passed through all of them. She moves like one of us. Rachel avoided conversations. She didn't linger during downtime or join the usual dark humor that helped soldiers cope. When asked about her background, she answered vaguely: training, deployments, nothing specific. No stories, no complaints, no visible fear. Only scars. Old ones, pale and jagged, occasionally glimpsed at the edge of her sleeves when she reached too far or worked too fast. Scars that didn't come from hospital accidents. One night, a rocket detonated close enough to knock dust from the ceiling. Medics ducked instinctively. Rachel didn't. She was already moving, shielding a patient with her body, eyes locked on the tent entrance, jaw tight, calculating. That was when the SEAL lieutenant watching security felt it. Not suspicion, recognition. Later, during a lull, he asked her quietly, "You ever been under fire before this place?" Rachel met his gaze for a fraction of a second too long. "Everyone here has," she answered. It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the truth. As the night wore on, the hospital settled into an uneasy rhythm. Groans of the wounded, distant gunfire, radios whispering reports. Rachel walked the perimeter of the medical area, checking locks, counting beds, memorizing faces. She paused near a supply crate tucked behind stacked medical gear. Her boot brushed it lightly, almost absent-mindedly. A nervous habit, perhaps. Or reassurance. Outside the wire, unseen eyes watched the hospital lights. Inside, Rachel felt the tension building, something primal, something learned the hard way. War had taught her this feeling before, the quiet before violence, the breath before the strike. She checked her watch. Then she tightened her gloves. The field hospital believed it was safe. Rachel knew better. And when the storm came, it wouldn't find her unprepared. Dawn came hot and red, painting the field hospital in a brutal light. Dust swirled around the tents like smoke from distant fires. The night had been restless. Mortar rounds had screamed close enough to shake the canvas walls, sending every operator and medic into a frantic rhythm of triage, treatment, and survival. Yet Rachel Hale moved through the chaos as if it were ordinary, calm, controlled, unshakable. By mid-morning, the hospital had seen a steady stream of casualties. The SEALs, elite operators who had faced the worst the world could throw at them, now relied entirely on her. Not just for medical care, but for guidance, reassurance, and an unspoken stability that kept their minds from fracturing under the stress of continuous combat. One operator, Petty Officer Daniels, lay on a table with a shrapnel wound across his torso. Blood stained his uniform and he was pale, shaking with pain. He had been screaming before Rachel arrived, lost in panic and shock. Yet in her presence he seemed to quiet. She knelt beside him, her hands moving with deliberate precision. "Keep your eyes open. Breathe with me," she said softly. Her voice was a tether, pulling him back from the edge of unconsciousness. She placed her hand firmly on his chest, checking vitals, reading the micro-movements in his muscles. Seconds later, she adjusted his IV line and cleaned the wound, all while murmuring directions to a young corpsman trying to keep up. The SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Carter, watched from a distance. He had seen a lot in his career: firefights in Iraq, ambushes in Afghanistan, missions that left entire units hollowed by loss. Yet there was something about Rachel that unsettled him. She wasn't just a nurse. Her movements carried authority that didn't come from rank but from experience. Every instruction she gave, every calculated motion, hinted at a history no one in the hospital could imagine. "Who trained her?" Carter muttered under his breath to the medic standing beside him. The medic shrugged. "Medical school, combat medic training." Carter wasn't convinced. He had worked with some of the best, but she moved, thought, and adapted like someone who had been on the front lines herself. Someone who had seen death so closely it no longer startled her. As the day dragged on, more SEALs arrived, wounded, exhausted, and tense. Some had bullet wounds, others had burns from improvised explosives. Rachel assessed them all with unflinching efficiency. She triaged silently, giving precise orders and correcting mistakes without raising her voice. One young corpsman fumbled with a clamp, and she took his hands in hers, guiding them with a firm, practiced grip. "You need to stay steady. Fear kills faster than the bullet," she said. Her words were soft, almost maternal, but the conviction behind them cut like steel. Outside the tents, the sound of distant gunfire punctuated the heat of the afternoon. Dust devils swirled across the dusty compound. Even with the hospital reinforced by sandbags and makeshift walls, the SEALs knew they were vulnerable. Yet they stayed inside, trusting Rachel's judgment implicitly. Later, during a brief lull, one operator leaned against a crate, bandaging a shallow wound on his arm. He watched Rachel move among the patients with fluid grace, never pausing, never hesitating. "She's not like anyone I've worked with," he said quietly to another SEAL. "She's more than a nurse," the other replied, voice low. "I can feel it. She's been somewhere worse." They didn't ask her directly. No one dared. It wasn't just protocol, it was instinct. Rachel had a way of commanding attention without speaking, and curiosity could be dangerous in someone who had survived the horrors she had. Meanwhile, Rachel kept her own thoughts close. Memories of firefights, of fallen comrades, of nights spent hiding under rubble while the world burned above her, flickered at the edges of her mind. She didn't speak of them. She didn't need to. The SEALs were alive because she kept those memories sharp, because she knew what to expect when chaos erupted. By late afternoon, fatigue had begun to set in. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, blood, and sweat. SEALs were stretched on stretchers, bandaging, hydrating, and catching stolen moments of rest. Rachel moved between them like a silent guardian. A sudden alarm, sharp, mechanical, cut through the hum of conversation. Rachel paused. Her eyes flicked toward the perimeter. Instinct tightened her muscles. Something was coming. Not the usual mortar fire, not distant gunfire. Something closer, something deliberate. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She simply adjusted her stance, scanned the perimeter, and tightened the straps on her gloves. Lieutenant Carter noticed the change immediately. Her posture, her focus, the way she shifted her weight, it was a combat stance, honed by years of real battle. "Something's wrong," he murmured. Rachel's eyes met his briefly. "We're going to find out soon enough," she said. The SEALs glanced at each other nervously. They had trained for ambushes, insurgent attacks, and urban warfare. Yet there was a quiet authority in Rachel's voice that made them pause. They trusted her instincts more than their own. And at that moment, Rachel Hale wasn't just a nurse. She was a sentinel, watching the horizon, anticipating the coming storm. The tension in the air was palpable. Every heartbeat in the hospital seemed louder than the last. Outside, dust and smoke curled across the compound, carrying a warning no one else could feel, except Rachel. She walked back to the trauma tables, checked the patient's vitals one last time, and whispered under her breath, "Stay calm, be ready." No one could hear her words except the wounded, the exhausted, and herself. But when the moment came, those words would matter more than any rifle, any armor, or any reinforcements. Because Rachel Hale was ready for what no one else expected. And the SEALs had no idea what they were about to witness. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the field hospital. Dust swirled along the ground, kicked up by restless medics and the occasional vehicle transporting wounded operators. Inside, Rachel Hale moved from patient to patient with unwavering precision, her gloves streaked with blood and antiseptic. Every movement, every glance was purposeful. Yet beneath the calm exterior, a cold awareness had settled over her like armor. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't the distant gunfire that had become a constant background hum, nor the occasional mortar that shook the tents. It was quieter, subtle, almost imperceptible, the kind of tension that only years of combat could teach a person to recognize. The way the wind shifted, the slight delay in the radio chatter, the unusual patterns of movement outside the perimeter. Rachel paused at the entrance to the trauma ward, her eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing appeared out of place. Yet instinct screamed that danger was near. She crouched slightly, fingertips brushing the edge of a supply crate, her mind racing through possibilities. A sniper, a small insurgent team, or something far more coordinated. Lieutenant Carter noticed the change immediately. The easy confidence that had surrounded her all morning was now focused, taut like a wire pulled tight. He leaned closer to a fellow SEAL, whispering, "She's seeing it. Whatever it is, she knows it's coming." The corpsman next to him gave a nervous laugh. "It's just a feeling. Maybe she's overthinking. She's had a long morning." Carter shook his head. "That's not overthinking. That's someone who's been in hell and knows the signs before the first explosion." Rachel moved quickly, checking defensive positions. She didn't draw attention, didn't speak loudly. Her mind was cataloging threats, escape routes, and lines of fire. Every piece of medical equipment became a potential barricade, every tent pole a defensive point. She repositioned stretchers slightly, ensuring wounded operators could be shielded from a frontal attack. She paused by a table holding a severely injured SEAL, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. The man was unaware of her subtle adjustments, but she knew they could save him if shots rang out nearby. She murmured under her breath, almost as a promise to herself, "Stay calm, stay alive." Meanwhile, outside the wire, the heat shimmered over the flat, dusty terrain. Rachel could sense the enemy's approach before anyone else could. The wind carried faint, irregular noises, footsteps against gravel, the soft scraping of packs across sand, pauses, scanning. The attackers were close and they were organized. This was no random attack. A young corpsman noticed Rachel's pause. "Lieutenant Hale, is everything okay?" She didn't turn. Her eyes never left the perimeter. "Prepare for movement. Keep everyone inside the tents. Double-check medical supplies. Check your weapons." The corpsman hesitated. "Weapons, I thought." "Do it now," she interrupted, voice firm but calm. "No questions, just do it." Even Lieutenant Carter felt a chill. He had seen countless operations go sideways, had planned dozens of missions with meticulous care. Yet the authority in her tone, a voice that carried the weight of experience, the quiet command of someone used to taking life-or-death decisions without hesitation, froze him. By late afternoon, tension had escalated into an almost unbearable weight. Rachel moved deliberately, quietly, methodically. She checked lines of sight through tent flaps, scanned over sandbag walls, and ensured the wounded were as protected as possible. The SEALs, used to the chaos of combat, began to mimic her caution. They followed her lead, eyes flicking to every shadow, ears straining for the faintest irregularity. Then came the subtle signs, the first faint explosion. Far away, almost indistinguishable from the usual barrage, but enough to make her muscles coil. Her hand hovered near a hidden crate beneath a table. Inside was a weapon she had kept ready for emergencies, a precaution, a secret she had never revealed. The SEALs were unaware of her preparedness. They assumed her calm efficiency was all medical skill. They had no idea that she had spent years training for moments like this, that she had carried more than medical kits and supplies into combat zones, that she had survived ambushes where the line between life and death was measured in seconds, bullets, and intuition. A sudden snap echoed in the distance, followed by muffled shouting. Rachel's gaze sharpened. The enemy had broken their silence. A small team was moving quickly, strategically, toward the hospital perimeter. Their timing suggested coordination. They were closing in. "Alert everyone," Rachel commanded softly, almost to herself. But the SEALs heard it. Radios crackled as messages went out. Soldiers moved, checking weapons and positions. The wounded were moved to safer areas within the tents. Barricades were reinforced. Every action was guided by her quiet authority. Lieutenant Carter approached her cautiously. "Rachel, do you really think they're coming for us?" She didn't look at him. Her eyes tracked shadows moving over sand dunes beyond the wire. "They're coming, and when they arrive, we survive. Everyone alive, we survive, trust me." Carter nodded, understanding that the calm certainty in her voice was more powerful than any plan he could make. This was no ordinary nurse. This was someone who had walked through hell and emerged with the ability to anticipate it, predict it, and counter it before anyone else even noticed. And in that moment, before the first real attack, before bullets shattered the tents and alarms screamed across the compound, the SEALs finally realized that Rachel Hale was not just a healer. She was a soldier, a guardian, a warrior in disguise. The quiet before the storm was suffocating. Every heartbeat in the hospital seemed louder than the last. Dust rose in lazy spirals across the tents, carrying with it the threat that Rachel had sensed before anyone else. She tightened her gloves, checked her rifle, adjusted the stretchers, repositioned the wounded, every move measured, every decision critical. And then, as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, painting the desert sky in blood-red streaks, the first sign of the assault struck. It was subtle at first, a shadow moving too fast behind a distant sand dune, a faint report of gunfire, then another, and another. The storm Rachel had anticipated had arrived. And she was ready. The first shots hit just as the sun began its descent, turning the desert sky a violent orange. The field hospital, fragile and exposed, shuddered under the assault. Explosions erupted near the perimeter, throwing sand and debris into the air. Inside, the wounded screamed as dust choked the tents and alarms screamed like banshees. Rachel Hale was already moving. She had anticipated this. Her fingers brushed the rifle she kept hidden beneath a supply crate, a precaution none of the SEALs had guessed she would ever need. Her eyes scanned the chaos, calculating angles of fire, escape routes, and the safest positions for the injured. "Move the patients," she barked, her voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. "Crawl under the stretchers now." Two medics scrambled, dragging unconscious operators toward reinforced positions. Bullets tore through canvas, snapping like angry snakes. Rachel was in the center of the chaos, unflinching. Her gloves, streaked with blood, gripped her rifle, and she fired with calm precision. A shadow moved across the far tent wall, an insurgent trying to flank the hospital. Rachel fired once. The man dropped before he could reach the wounded. Another tried to storm the main entrance. She reloaded quickly, swinging the rifle with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Carter stumbled into the tent wide-eyed. She's shooting," he yelled, astonished. "She's saving lives." Another SEAL corrected him, but even that sounded inadequate. Rachel's movements were a blur. She didn't just fire, she coordinated. She pointed, shouted positions, and repositioned stretchers to create makeshift cover. Each action balanced dual roles, protector and healer. Bloodied hands dragged a wounded operator to the corner. With one motion, she stabilized his wound, checked his pulse, then pivoted back to confront a new threat. Outside the tents, more shadows emerged. A small team of armed militants had breached the perimeter, moving in coordination, firing at anything that moved. Rachel anticipated their approach. She had already adjusted the positions of defensive teams, calculated firing lines, and instructed SEALs to cover specific zones, all before the enemy even entered the hospital compound. One SEAL froze mid-step, overwhelmed by the assault. Rachel grabbed him by the collar and shoved him behind a sandbag barrier. "Focus. Eyes forward. Don't hesitate." The SEAL nodded, snapping into action. Another insurgent lunged toward a medical table. Rachel fired. The enemy collapsed, never reaching his target. Every movement Rachel made was precise, calculated. Her voice carried authority that no one dared question. SEALs who had fought in countless firefights followed her lead instinctively. She directed them with minimal words, each command tailored to the environment, the wounded, and the flow of the battle. Amid the chaos, Rachel's eyes caught a flash of movement near the generator tent. A militant was attempting to disable power, to plunge the hospital into darkness. Without hesitation, she sprinted across open ground, sliding behind the man, and neutralized him before he could reach the machinery. Sparks flew from the generator, but it remained functional, life-saving electricity preserved by her decisive action. Corpsmen continued their work, patching wounds, administering IVs, and stabilizing the critically injured. Rachel moved between them, directing traffic, redistributing ammunition, and shielding the injured from stray gunfire. The line between combatant and medic blurred as she balanced survival and care with terrifying efficiency. Lieutenant Carter ducked behind a tent flap, catching his breath. "Who is she?" he muttered under his breath. "She's more than a nurse," one of the SEALs replied, voice tight. "She's been here before, she knows this." As the firefight continued, Rachel noticed the attackers attempting to breach the rear tent, where the most critical patients lay. Without hesitation, she grabbed a crate, barricading the entrance, then fired at the enemy's feet to halt their advance. The shock of the sudden, lethal precision sent the militants scrambling. The hospital became a maze of controlled chaos. Rachel moved like a conductor of destruction, orchestrating life and death simultaneously. Every breath was calculated, every motion was deliberate. She treated wounds with one hand while clearing hallways with the other. A sudden explosion rocked the central tent. Dust and debris rained down, knocking Rachel to one knee. Pain lanced through her shoulder, but she ignored it. She grabbed a fallen rifle, fired 2 precise shots, and took cover behind the trauma table. Another SEAL shouted, "She's a machine." Rachel didn't respond. She simply scanned the battlefield, eyes moving faster than bullets, calculating next moves. She directed operators to reinforce positions, reposition the wounded, and ensured no one was left exposed. As darkness began to fall, the intensity of the assault increased. The enemy, confident in their numbers, pushed forward aggressively. Yet Rachel's control held. Her calm amidst the storm created a bubble of survival in the midst of chaos. The wounded remained alive. The SEALs remained alive. And through it all, she never hesitated, never panicked, never faltered. By the time reinforcements arrived on the horizon, the hospital was scarred but standing. Smoke rose from damaged tents, sand covered the floor, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the compound. The enemy had been repelled, but only just. Lieutenant Carter finally approached her, eyes wide and voice filled with awe. Who are you?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She surveyed the hospital, checking on every patient one last time. Then she finally spoke, quietly but with undeniable authority. "I'm who I needed to be." No one yet understood the full truth. But in that moment, everyone in the field hospital realized one fact. The calm, efficient nurse they had trusted to save lives was something far more formidable. She was a warrior, and she had just turned a hospital into a battlefield they survived only because of her. The smoke hung heavy, the desert wind carried the acrid scent of explosives, and the night drew near. But Rachel Hale remained standing. And the SEALs would never see her the same way again. The night had fallen like a shroud over the desert field hospital. Smoke from burned tents twisted into the sky, carrying the acrid stench of explosives and gunpowder. Inside, the wounded moaned softly, bandaged bodies sprawled across cots and stretchers. Outside, shadows flickered in the flickering light of burning sandbags. The enemy had not fully retreated. Small teams still probed, shooting blindly at anything that moved. Rachel Hale moved through the chaos like a force of nature. Rifle in hand, every motion precise, every decision calculated. She coordinated defensive positions, redistributed ammunition, and ensured every operator covered another's blind spot. Yet despite the adrenaline and danger, her movements were calm, measured, almost fluid. Lieutenant Carter watched her from the doorway, disbelief etched across his face. He had been through countless firefights, witnessed SEALs fall and rise, survived ambushes that left entire units hollowed by loss. But nothing had prepared him for this. A woman they had all assumed was a mere combat nurse, acting like a battle-hardened operator in real time, saving lives and taking enemies down with lethal precision. One SEAL, rifle raised, shouted from behind a barricade, "Who trained her?" Rachel didn't flinch. Her eyes never left the enemy. She fired, neutralizing another militant attempting to crawl through the shadows near a supply tent. Then, in a pause between controlled bursts, she finally answered, not to correct them but to state the truth. "The United States Marine Corps." The words hit harder than any gunfire. Lieutenant Carter's jaw dropped. Several SEALs froze mid-motion, guns still trained on advancing targets, mouths open. The nurse they had trusted implicitly, the healer they had confided in during nights of quiet desperation, was not only combat-trained. She had been trained to lead, fight, and survive in the most brutal conditions imaginable. Rachel didn't explain further. There was no time. The enemy pressed closer, attempting to breach the rear tents where the critically wounded lay. Without hesitation, she sprinted across the open space between sandbags, dragging a heavy crate as improvised cover. Bullets snapped past her, kicking up sand, but she pressed forward, firing with precision and instinct. Every movement was a balance of offense and protection, every shot calculated to stop the enemy without endangering the injured. A SEAL beside Carter shouted, incredulous, "She's a Marine, and she's been hiding it all this time." Carter shook his head, not hiding, waiting for this moment. Rachel reached the rear tent, slammed the crate against the entrance and set up a defensive angle. Bullets pinged off the metal and sandbags, but she held her ground, covering the operators and wounded inside. One militant attempted to rush past her position. Rachel fired once, center mass. The man collapsed, never reaching his target. Another tried to flank her. She pivoted with lightning speed, placing a second precise shot that sent him sprawling. Inside the tent, corpsmen and SEALs stared in awe. Her dual role, protector and healer, was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, undeniable. She stabilized a critically wounded SEAL, checked vitals, and repositioned him behind cover before turning back to fire at incoming threats. Her efficiency and focus were staggering. A flashback momentarily flickered through her mind. Deployments in Afghanistan, firefights in deserts far worse than this, comrades lost in ambushes that left no time to grieve. She had survived because she had learned to anticipate, to act before chaos struck, to balance life and death in a heartbeat. All of that training, all of that experience, was now protecting lives in a small, improvised hospital tent in the middle of the desert. "Move, keep moving," she barked, directing a group of SEALs to cover blind spots as another militant fired through a breach in the outer wall. One operator hesitated, stunned by the revelation of her past. "She's leading us like a squad leader," he whispered. Another nodded. "We've underestimated her, big mistake." Rachel didn't respond. She had no time. Every second mattered. A wounded SEAL cried out from behind a stretcher, and she was there instantly, stabilizing him while simultaneously covering another angle. She worked like a machine with a heart, calculated yet human, precise yet compassionate. Outside, enemy fire intensified, but Rachel's command presence held the line. Operators who had previously questioned her authority now followed her orders instinctively. Her Marine training, combined with her medical expertise, allowed her to coordinate fire, protect the injured, and neutralize threats with terrifying efficiency. Lieutenant Carter finally approached her during a brief lull, ducking behind a destroyed barricade. His eyes were wide, his voice raw with disbelief. "Rachel, why didn't you tell us?" She glanced at him, rifle ready, eyes scanning shadows. "Because it didn't matter until now. All that mattered was saving lives. That's still my mission." Carter's jaw tightened. He understood, finally, that the woman they had trusted as a nurse was a warrior first. She had chosen this role not for glory, but because it was the right place to be when bullets flew and lives hung in the balance. The enemy pressed once more. Rachel reloaded, adjusted positions, and fired again, stopping a militant from reaching the wounded. The SEALs followed her lead, moving with renewed focus and precision. Her revelation had not distracted them, it had galvanized them. They trusted her implicitly, knowing she had seen worse, survived worse, and could guide them through this hell. As the first reinforcements were spotted approaching on the horizon, Rachel scanned the field, ensuring that every wounded operator was accounted for. Smoke rose from damaged tents, bullets ricocheted, and sand swirled around her boots. Yet through it all, she remained a calm eye in the storm. Lieutenant Carter whispered to himself, more in awe than fear. "She's not just a nurse, she's a Marine, and she saved all of us tonight." Rachel didn't answer. She had no need to. Her actions spoke louder than any words could. Every life preserved, every enemy stopped, every wound stabilized. This was her testimony. In the heart of a field hospital turned battlefield, the SEALs learned a hard, unforgettable truth. Heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the most lethal and indispensable warrior is the one you least expect. Rachel Hale had just revealed who she truly was, and the hospital for the first time felt truly defended. The field hospital had become a fortress of chaos. Smoke curled into the desert night like ghostly fingers, carrying the acrid scent of burning tents, sand, and blood. Bullets pinged against metal, sandbags shifted under impact, and cries of pain mingled with the thunder of gunfire. The enemy was relentless, probing every weak point, testing defenses. But Rachel Hale moved through it all like a force of nature, controlled, precise, unstoppable. She had fully revealed herself as a Marine to the SEALs, but there was no time to dwell on astonishment. Lives were on the line, and the attackers showed no mercy. "Cover the left flank. Rotate. Don't leave anyone exposed," Rachel shouted, her voice cutting above the chaos. Every SEAL obeyed instantly, their trust in her absolute. She had been anticipating movements like these for years. Every shadow, every sound of footfall, every flash of light carried meaning. One SEAL, Corporal Ramirez, struggled to drag a severely wounded teammate to cover. Rachel was instantly at his side, grabbing his arm and repositioning both men behind a reinforced sandbag barrier. "Move faster. Every second counts," she commanded. Her hands were steady even as shells exploded around them, dust and shrapnel raining down. A sudden burst of automatic fire struck near a critical patient. Rachel dove, dragging the man behind her and slamming a crate against the opening to create improvised cover. Bullets struck the crate, splintering wood, and a cloud of dust enveloped them. Her breathing remained controlled, even as adrenaline surged. She checked the operator's vitals quickly, then reassessed the perimeter. Another militant tried to crawl toward the trauma tent. Rachel fired without hesitation, her movements fluid, almost mechanical. In the same instant, she instructed two SEALs to rotate to the right flank, ensuring that every approach was covered. The SEALs realized something extraordinary. She was orchestrating a symphony of combat and care, blending lethal action with life-saving precision. One operator whispered in disbelief, "She's everywhere at once." Rachel didn't pause to answer. Another explosion rocked the main tent, knocking supplies to the ground and scattering debris. The wounded screamed as dust filled the air. Rachel crawled toward a fallen stretcher, lifting it to shield a critically injured SEAL from flying fragments. In the same motion, she reloaded her rifle and neutralized a threat trying to flank from the side. Lieutenant Carter shouted from his position, struggling to be heard over the chaos. "Rachel, how are you doing this?" She didn't answer. Actions spoke louder than words. She coordinated, protected, and attacked in perfect balance, giving the operators confidence they hadn't felt since the first moments of the assault. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The enemy showed no sign of retreat, moving with tactical coordination and ruthless intent. Rachel had anticipated their strategy, placing operators at points of maximum effect, creating crossfires that forced the militants to pause or retreat. Every wounded operator was accounted for, every line of fire calculated to minimize risk while maximizing defensive power. A SEAL looked over at her during a brief lull and whispered to a comrade, "She's not just saving lives, she's leading us, like a commander in the field." Rachel's eyes never left the perimeter. Another flash of movement caught her attention, a small team trying to exploit a gap near the generator. Without hesitation, she sprinted across open ground, dragging another crate behind her for cover. Bullets kicked up sand at her feet, but she pressed forward, neutralizing two attackers before they could reach critical equipment. The generator hummed safely, ensuring that lights, life support, and communications remained functional. The SEALs, inspired by her courage and skill, redoubled their efforts. They moved with renewed precision, covering angles, redistributing ammunition, and protecting the wounded. Casualties were mounting, but thanks to Rachel's command, no life had been lost unnecessarily. As the night wore on, the fighting became even more intense. One insurgent broke through a barricade near a stretcher. Rachel was already there, rifle ready, firing a single, precise shot that stopped him instantly. She turned immediately, dragging the wounded operator further into cover while another SEAL provided suppressive fire. In those moments, Rachel's Marine training revealed itself fully. Her mind was calculating trajectory, positioning, and timing, all while maintaining care for the wounded. Every action, every decision was deliberate. She balanced offense and defense with terrifying efficiency. Finally, the first signs of reinforcements appeared on the horizon, helicopters kicking up sand, additional SEALs moving toward the hospital. But Rachel didn't allow herself relief. Until every wounded operator was secure and every enemy neutralized, the fight wasn't over. Carter, observing from a safe position, shook his head in awe. "She's incredible. I've never seen anyone move like that." One SEAL muttered almost reverently, "She's not just a Marine, she's a guardian, a force of nature." Rachel paused for a brief moment to check on her patients, adjusting IVs and ensuring no one had been missed. Blood and sweat coated her gloves, her uniform, and her face. Her breathing remained steady, controlled. The chaos raged around her, yet she was calm, focused, and unstoppable. As the reinforcements closed in, Rachel signaled the SEALs to maintain positions, to cover all approaches, and to continue protecting the wounded until the threat was fully neutralized. Her leadership had turned a near-catastrophic ambush into a controlled defense, saving countless lives. And when the dust settled, when the smoke hung heavy over the battered tents and the night sky began to clear, the SEALs understood the truth. This woman, this nurse, had been the difference between survival and disaster. Rachel Hale had not only held the line, she had transformed the hospital into a bastion of defense, combining lethal precision, tactical genius, and life-saving care in a way no one had expected. And through it all, she remained calm, resolute, and utterly unshakable. The fight was not yet fully over, but one thing was certain: the SEALs would never underestimate her again. Dawn broke over the field hospital like a reluctant promise. The desert sky was streaked with pale gold and red, painting the smoke-laden air in harsh light. The chaos of the night before had subsided, leaving a surreal stillness over the compound. Broken tents sagged under their own weight, sandbags had shifted from relentless gunfire, and the scent of spent gunpowder still lingered, mingling with antiseptic and blood. The wounded were stabilizing, and medics moved carefully between stretchers, checking vital signs and administering pain relief. Corpsmen and SEALs alike were bruised, scratched, and exhausted, but alive. Every life saved carried Rachel Hale's imprint. Lieutenant Carter walked slowly through the wreckage, finally processing what had happened. Every step brought him closer to the reality that the woman he had trusted as a quiet, capable nurse had, in the span of hours, become the single most decisive force in the survival of their team. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the compound, yet every glance found Rachel calmly checking the wounded, gloves still stained with yesterday's blood. "She's unbelievable," Carter muttered to one of his team members. Another SEAL nodded, voice hushed. "Not unbelievable, she's a Marine, and she just reminded us all why that matters." Rachel moved with quiet authority, helping a young operator adjust his sling, stabilizing another's IV line, and giving terse, precise instructions to corpsmen. No words of praise passed her lips. Her focus was entirely on the injured, on the task, on the mission that had shifted overnight from medicine to survival. Outside the tents, operators began to sift through the wreckage, checking their weapons, their gear, and their own wounds. They were exhausted in ways that went beyond fatigue. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced with the sobering realization of how close they had come to disaster. Yet there was a new undercurrent among them, a deep respect, almost reverent, for the woman who had held them together when the world had threatened to collapse. One SEAL approached Rachel cautiously, helmet tilted back and voice low. "Lieutenant, I didn't realize," he trailed off, unable to finish. Rachel glanced up, expression calm, voice steady. "You didn't need to, we survived, that's what matters." The SEAL nodded, swallowing hard. His respect was evident, unspoken but palpable. In the hours that followed, this quiet acknowledgement rippled across the team. The SEALs, who had witnessed countless acts of courage and survival, recognized a rare truth. Rachel Hale had led them with precision, courage, and selflessness. She had not sought recognition, medals, or praise. She had acted because it was necessary. Even Lieutenant Carter found himself at a loss for words. He had commanded operations across deserts, mountains, and cities, yet he had never encountered someone who combined medical skill with combat leadership so seamlessly. It was as if the battlefield and the hospital had merged, and Rachel had become its singular force of control. "Did you see how she handled the left flank?" one operator asked another, eyes still haunted but glowing with admiration. "Every move calculated, every shot perfect, and she never faltered, not once." "She's a Marine," the other whispered. "That's the difference." Rachel didn't linger to hear the praise. She moved between tents, checking vitals, stabilizing patients, and quietly issuing orders to ensure nothing was overlooked. Her composure was unshakable. For the first time, some of the SEALs realized that the woman they had trusted as a nurse was not only a combat veteran, they had underestimated her entirely. The morning carried a strange duality: relief and exhaustion, fear and awe. Operators who had questioned her authority during the battle now followed her guidance without hesitation, their trust complete. It wasn't blind obedience. It was earned respect, the kind that comes only when lives have been directly saved by someone's actions under fire. Rachel finally allowed herself a brief pause, sitting beside a wounded operator to adjust his IV line. The first rays of sunlight hit her face, revealing faint scars along her forearms. They were subtle, pale, but they told a story the SEALs could not yet fully comprehend, a history of survival, loss, and unflinching commitment. Lieutenant Carter approached, quietly kneeling beside her. "Rachel, you saved all of us last night, all of us. We owe you." She shook her head, cutting him off softly. "You don't owe me anything. You survived. That's enough." Her voice was gentle, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. She had been here before, seen what it meant to survive against impossible odds, and she had no need for validation. The SEALs began repairing tents, cleaning weapons, and tending to the wounded, but the unspoken lesson lingered. Courage could take many forms. Leadership could be silent yet absolute. And sometimes the most formidable warriors were those who wore scrubs, not armor, and wielded a scalpel as deftly as a rifle. By midday, the field hospital had regained a semblance of order. Supplies were counted, wounded stabilized, and the perimeter reinforced. The SEALs moved with quiet efficiency, their respect for Rachel unspoken but unmistakable in every glance, every nod, every instinctive reaction to her commands. As they prepared for redeployment, Lieutenant Carter observed her one last time, thinking not of rank, medals, or titles, but of the courage, skill, and humanity she had displayed. "She's one of us," he murmured, "and she always will be." Rachel, unaware of his words, continued tending to the wounded. She didn't need acknowledgement. She had done what she came to do: protect, heal, and survive. The SEALs had witnessed a rare truth, that true heroism was often silent, earned in moments of terror, and revealed only when it mattered most. And in that moment the desert seemed quieter. The smoke still curled into the sky, the tents were battered but standing, and the bonds between warriors had been forged, tested, and solidified, without a single word of praise exchanged. Respect had been earned, and it was absolute. The desert sun rose higher, burning away the cold shadows of the night's battle. The field hospital, though battered and scorched, stood like a testament to resilience. The tents were patched, sandbags reinforced, and the wounded stabilized. Silence settled over the compound for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Rachel Hale moved among the stretchers with quiet efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, and speaking softly to the injured. Her hands were steady, her movements deliberate, yet beneath the calm exterior, her mind replayed every second of the ambush. Every flash of gunfire, every precise decision, every life saved. It was all a blur, yet crystal clear in her memory. Lieutenant Carter stood near the entrance, observing her. His team, exhausted but alive, moved with renewed determination around him. He couldn't shake the awe he felt. Rachel hadn't just saved lives. She had changed the way these SEALs saw the world and themselves. "She's incredible," one operator muttered to another as they cleaned debris from weapons. "Not just a nurse, a Marine, a warrior." Another nodded. "I can't believe we didn't know. All this time we underestimated her." Rachel overheard the whispers but did not respond. Words had never been necessary for her. Her actions had spoken louder than any accolade could. Every life preserved, every enemy stopped, every decision made under fire. It was proof enough of her dedication and skill. The wounded began to speak, their voices weak but grateful. "Thank you," one SEAL murmured, clutching Rachel's hand as she adjusted his IV. Another gave a faint nod, eyes filled with respect and admiration. These were men who had faced death countless times, yet none had left her presence without the profound realization of her courage. Carter approached her again, voice low, almost reverent. "Rachel, last night you saved every single one of us. I've led missions all over the world, faced ambushes that would have broken most people. But you were unstoppable. How do you do it?" Rachel finally allowed herself a small, tired smile. It wasn't pride. It wasn't triumph. It was simply the recognition that her purpose had been fulfilled. "I do what's necessary," she said quietly. "That's all. You survived. That's enough for me." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of someone who had seen war from both sides. The healer, the fighter, the protector. In those moments, the SEALs understood that heroism was not about medals or recognition. It was about action, presence, and unwavering commitment in the face of chaos. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly. The sky was a pale blue, the remnants of smoke drifting lazily across the dunes. The field hospital, though scarred, had become a symbol of resilience. Every tent, every sandbag, every piece of equipment bore witness to the battle and the lives saved within its walls. The SEALs gathered briefly, quietly acknowledging one another and the woman who had led them through the storm. There were no grand speeches, no accolades, no formal recognition. But in every glance, every nod, every subtle gesture, they communicated the respect and gratitude they felt for Rachel. Carter caught one operator looking at Rachel with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "We'll never underestimate anyone again," he said softly. "No," the operator agreed. "Not her, not anyone." Rachel moved toward the edge of the compound, surveying the perimeter one last time. Her mind cataloged the night's events, analyzing threats, decisions, and outcomes. She felt the familiar weight of responsibility, the knowledge that lives had hung in the balance and that her choices had made the difference. Yet there was also relief, a rare, quiet satisfaction. The SEALs were alive, the wounded were stabilized, and the field hospital had endured. Carter joined her, silent for a moment. Then he asked, almost cautiously, "Will they ever know what you did?" Rachel shook her head. "It doesn't matter, they lived, that's enough." Her humility was as striking as her skill. She had operated in the shadows, saving lives and leading silently, yet the impact of her actions could not be ignored. The SEALs had witnessed firsthand the extraordinary combination of medical expertise, tactical genius, and combat leadership that she embodied. As the first helicopters arrived to evacuate the wounded, Rachel coordinated with precision, ensuring every patient was secure, every operator accounted for, and every weapon and supply was in order. The SEALs moved with renewed energy, following her guidance, though many still glanced at her with quiet reverence. Finally, the last patient was loaded, stretchers secured, and the field hospital quieted. Rachel surveyed the scene, taking in the damage, the blood, the chaos now subdued. She allowed herself a deep breath, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Lieutenant Carter approached once more, hand extended. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Rachel accepted the handshake, firm and steady. "You don't need to, just live. That's thanks enough." As the helicopters lifted off, carrying wounded operators to safety, the SEALs watched Rachel hail, realizing they had witnessed something rare. Not just courage or skill, but the embodiment of duty, compassion, and lethal efficiency combined. She had saved lives, held the line under impossible pressure, and revealed a side of herself that none of them had expected, but all would respect forever. The desert returned to its silence, broken only by the wind and the faint cries of birds far overhead. The field hospital, though scarred, stood as a testament to survival, courage, and unexpected heroism. And Rachel Hale, the nurse, the Marine, the warrior in the shadows, remained at its heart, silent, unassuming, yet utterly unforgettable. The SEALs knew one thing for certain. In the crucible of fire and blood, they had encountered a force unlike any other. Someone who could heal, fight, and lead simultaneously. Someone who had saved them all. And though she would never seek recognition, Rachel Hale's legend would live quietly in their memories, whispered in moments of reflection, and honored in the lives she had preserved. Because true heroes rarely announce themselves, they act, they endure, and when the world needs them most, they become unstoppable. And in that sun-drenched desert, the SEALs knew that Rachel Hale, nurse, Marine, and guardian, had been exactly what they needed.